Well, he chaired the Freshwater Leaders Group, and he says that these new freshwater rules are designed to lift the performance of laggards and should have little effect on those already meeting high environmental standards. I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments wherever you are watching below. John Leyland-Penno, former founder of Synlait, chaired this group around the initial stages of the policy's development and joins us now. Good evening, John.
Good evening, Sarah.
Now, laggards, do you really strongly believe that New Zealand's farmers are ready, in a position and able to implement these freshwater rules so quickly?
Look, I think there's a lot of the things in the rules have been things that the best farmers out there have been doing for a long time and working towards them. And that's been part of the debate, I think, that some don't see the need for the rules because they have shifted so far. They've done so much over the last decades. Personally, I think these rules are targeted at those who have chosen or haven't been in a position to move, and I guess time is up on some of those practices.
Of course, we speak a lot to the sustainability team at Synlait and in your former role, and they believe that the freshwater environment plans that have been in place, particularly across both Fonterra and Synlait, will be able to adapt, and there has been a lot of work done. However, do you believe you were in the position of negotiating and providing advice to the government that they shouldn't have been in a position to have to amend post the release of these standards? I mean, should they have listened, they wouldn't have had to amend.
Look, it was, for a start, the role of the Freshwater Leaders Group and that I chaired was to work with the officials as they worked through to meet the objectives that the ministers laid down for them. But it was more than that. The whole program was really the last piece of work that came out of the Land and Water Forum work that had gone on for a decade before. And that work had been very broadly consulted on. It had a huge range of interest groups involved, farmers, NGOs, the industry leadership groups, and they had come up with a plan. And most of the things that are being implemented as part of this package were those things that hadn't yet been implemented at the end of that process. So there's nothing new in any of this. I guess where it got difficult, though, or where it is difficult, is for the officials to take some of the concepts, some of the things that I think a wide number of New Zealanders and quite a number of farmers who I'm talking to do believe it's time were put in place. It is difficult to craft them into regulations that are going to be rolled out nationally in a way that is going to be fair for all. And for those officials, as they're drafting up the regulations, to think about all of the various permutations in the various regions across New Zealand. And I for one am pleased that the government has continued to listen right until the end. And I hope that they continue to amend these regulations as they're rolled out and put into practice, because it's the outcomes that we want. It's not a set of rules. It is the freshwater outcomes that are so important for our future, both as farmers and a country.
Yeah, but is it really in terms of outcomes? Because we had such an output-based system that for the last decade we were working to improve. Now we effectively are having a rule book on how to farm. It's
actually been moving for some time, and I for one would much rather have an outcome-based system where farmers are given freedom to work towards the outcomes that, the freshwater outcomes or the air quality outcomes or whatever the environmental standard we're trying to achieve is. Farmers have got to have the flexibility to innovate, to change, to adapt, and get the outcome that is required. The problem is that the outcome-based system that we worked to for so long, the leading farmers were moving, they were changing, they were improving. But on every river, every catchment up and down New Zealand, every farmer group that I talk to can point to those on that catchment who have not been doing what they should. And really they're letting everyone else down on that catchment. And more than that, the leading farmers are starting to pay for the poor practice of others. And I think that's where I strongly believe that it really is time to put some things in place so that those who need to catch up.
Okay, so you're saying that you've had the carrot for long enough, now it's time for a stick.
That's one way of putting it. But the carrots are still there. The carrots are increasingly there from industry groups, from commercial enterprises like Synlait, like Fonterra. We've just seen them very recently put in a carrot-based system, but it's a carrot and stick. We're not moving to a stick-based system. We're providing some tools to allow those who need to catch up to be, encouraged, forced to catch up where they need to.
I'd love to ask your opinion around communication style to bring forth the laggards, you call them, with you, because there's a lot of defensive talk. Listened to an interview recently with Minister David Parker. He has a lot of fair points about sediment runoff in Otago and Southland. However, how do you bring people along when they have had a very you'll do as you're told communication style?
Yeah, well, look, that's I guess that's why I'm definitely not a politician, and I don't aspire to be a politician. There's been a lot of encouraging talk and trying to make sure people understand outcomes, for a very long time. But once, I think that, one of the things that I saw as part of that group, remembering our group we had some leading farmers sitting around the table, we had some academic people sitting around the table, we also had some NGO groups sitting around the table. And what I found increasingly as our process went on is the vast majority of things, we actually agreed on the outcomes that we were trying to achieve. And that was exactly the same with the Land and Water Forum. For 10 years, everyone agreed on where we had to get to. The problem was that, I guess, in the farming community, we're very defensive of those who perhaps haven't moved in the way that they should. And while in the farming community, we see some of the communication style of the political leaders as being a bit, blunt. There's a big part of the community who want our politicians to be blunt with those farmers who haven't been moving.
So when do you believe we will understand what it is to have a social licence to operate in this country?
Well, actually, I formed the view through this process that it was really important to get this settled now. There had been a lot of loose ends left at the end of the Land and Water Forum process. Not everything that they'd recommended had been put into place, and farmers need certainty. Farmers have had uncertainty in this space for quite a long time. The freshwater national policy statement first came out. The first one was done in 2011. It was amended in 2014, again a couple of years later. When things are moving like that, it's very, very difficult for regional councils and then farmers to get a clear view of what the expectations are for the future and make decisions accordingly. So I think one of the good things that is happening at the moment, we may not like all the rules, we may not like everything that's happening, but it is providing some certainty that we haven't had for some time. Do
you know who also doesn't like a lot of this too is the financiers, the bank managers and the accountants around this? I mean, I know that your background is heavily in dairy, John, but there's a lot of sheep and beef properties which are looking down the barrel of fencing off any waterway larger than 1 metre and putting in stockwater systems, which will literally see them sell up because it won't be viable to farm in our high country. What is the most efficient use of turning low quality feed into protein? And of course the finances don't really stack up on a lot of these places. I know there's a bit of research going on this week with Farmers Weekly team into some of those costs. Eye-watering, especially where on this low slope. How do you achieve profitability and sustainability in the same sentence?
Well, look, our strong advice to the government, and actually I think, I read some of these things and I hear some of these things, and I've talked to farmers in recent weeks who are concerned about some of this. And I think this will come down to the interpretation of how these rules are played out. And I hope that the ministers continue to provide strong guidance to this. As I understand it, the only sheep and beef farmers who will really need to fence off these waterways are either those on low slope who are farming intensively and really should have been fencing waterways a long time ago. There's a lot of beef land out there that is farmed as intensively as dairy that doesn't have animals fenced. And, I'm in a position where we've just bought a farm and I can look at what's happening. One of the farms doesn't even have a water supply system. There's been intensive wintering of beef stock on that farm where they're drinking directly out of freshwater systems. So it's definitely happening. That should have been done quite a long time ago. Those who are on, look, I do know that there are, the way that the maps are coming out, there are some people who are being classified incorrectly, really, when you look at their slope and the level of intensity of those farms. And if you follow it to the letter of the regulation, they would be caught out. In those situations, I'd encourage those farmers to work closely with the regional councils, get their farm environment plans done and show how they're going to manage those risks. I don't think the intent here is to force people to be fencing waterways that really it doesn't make any sense to be fencing because of the low level of intensity of farming around them, and therefore it's really not going to have any impact. And so I think that I know people are worried as they read the sort of the letter of the regulations. My hope at this point, and we had a lot of discussion with that with the officials as they were putting this in place. My hope is that the regional councils will be sensible with it and that they'll get strong direction from Wellington that that needs to be the case. Because every farm is different, every situation is different, and it is very difficult to sort of allow this to play out by strict interpretation of these regulations.
Did you give advice about the level of capability on the ground to be able to audit and certify that amount of freshwater environment plans and the pressure on regional council and already stretched the Ministry for the Environment staff and how this will actually be able to come into force?
Yeah, look, I think that's a very important point, Sarah. In our report, there's quite a big section on capability. Whichever way you look at it, there has to be the right capability in the system to make sure that this isn't full of unintended consequences, really. And we talked quite a lot about ensuring that that capability was built quickly, and that there was capability that could come in and assist in areas or councils or with farmer groups and regions where it was needed. So I think that is a good point, and it is going to require a capability build over time for this to be rolled out sensibly.
Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. John Leyland-Penno, who was chairing the Freshwater Leaders Group and, of course, providing advice to the government through the negotiations on our new freshwater rules.
This is Sarah's Country.